You ever think you're about to do something really nice for your spouse, like cook dinner, and instantly realize you might be in over your head? That was me last Friday. I decided I'm gonna cook dinner for my wife. It's going to be perfect. I imagined her coming home, the smell of food filling the house, and a calm, satisfied smile on her face. 10 minutes in, I realized I had no idea how to boil water without setting off a minor panic. I grabbed a pot, filled it up, and somehow the water overflowed before it even started boiling. I'm standing there, wiping up water, thinking, okay, maybe I can recover from this. Then came the chopping. I thought, how hard can chopping vegetables be? 2 carrots later, I had somehow turned my cutting board into a crime scene. I accidentally flung a piece of carrot across the kitchen, narrowly missing the dog, who gave me a look like I had lost my mind. The onion made me cry instantly. I realized that cooking is just one long test of patience and coordination that I was clearly failing. At one point, I held a knife in one hand, a crying onion in the other, and looked at the stove like it was judging me. Next, the actual cooking part. I tried to follow a recipe, which is never a good idea for me. The pan was too hot. The oil started popping. I ended up doing what I like to call stirring with fear. Smoke started filling the kitchen. My wife walked in and asked, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Yep, just giving it flavor," which was partially true because I had no other options. By the time I put the first dish on the table, it looked nothing like the picture in the recipe. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was edible. At the end of the night, my wife took a bite, gave me a half smile, and said, "Well, it's interesting." I laughed, realizing that cooking for someone you love doesn't have to be perfect. It's the effort, the chaos, and the stories you create along the way. Dinner may have been a disaster. The kitchen may have been covered in carrot shrapnel. I may have almost set off the smoke alarm, but we survived. That's really what cooking and adulting is all about: trying, failing spectacularly, and somehow laughing through it together. I thought I was being really thoughtful when I decided to cook dinner for my wife. I imagined her coming home, the house smelling like something out of a fancy restaurant, and me standing there looking like the domestic superhero I clearly believed I was. I told myself, this is going to be perfect. Nothing can go wrong. Famous last words. The first problem hit almost immediately. Opened the cabinet to grab a pot and realized I had no idea which one was clean. I picked one only to discover it had a ring of dried on spaghetti sauce from some long forgotten meal. Stared at it like it had personally offended me. Then came the water. Boiling water seemed simple enough in theory. Fill the pot, stove, easy, right, wrong? I filled it too full. And within seconds, it was bubbling over like a mini geyser in the middle of my kitchen. I scrambled to move the pot, but somehow managed to spray water everywhere. My socks were soaked, my pants damp, and I realized I might be in over my head. I stood there holding a pot with one hand, wiping up water with the other, wondered why I ever thought this would be easier than ordering takeout. Even the simplest prep tasks were suddenly complicated. I thought grabbing a cutting board would be fine, but of course, it was slightly warped. I set it down. It tilted. I nearly sent a tomato rolling off the counter. By this point, I was having a full-blown conversation with myself, explaining to the pot, the stove, and even the tomato that it wasn't personal, that I was just trying to help. My wife walked in at one point, looked at me standing in a puddle of my own making, and said, "Are you sure you've done this before?" I nodded confidently, though inside I was questioning, Every single decision I'd ever made in my life. Hit me right then that cooking for someone you love is less about skill and more about ambition meeting reality. You have good intentions, and then the universe has a different plan for you, complete with water, soap, and minor panic. Every heroic thought I had about impressing my wife slowly dissolved into comedic chaos. I realized that maybe this is exactly why people order takeout. I thought boiling water was supposed to be the easiest part of cooking, and yet somehow it turned into a full-blown disaster. I filled the pot, turned on the stove, and stepped back thinking this is going to be fine. 5 seconds later, the water started bubbling violently, then spilling over the sides like it had a personal vendetta against me. I tried to catch it, but the steam hit my face and the water sprayed across the counter. At that moment, I realized cooking isn't just about following steps, it's about surviving unexpected chaos. Came the challenge of actually handling the pot. I had one hand holding it, the other frantically wiping up the mess, and I was slipping on the wet floor like I was in some kind of kitchen-themed ice skating competition. The soap from washing a pan earlier had made it even more slippery, and suddenly, the pot felt like a live grenade. I was muttering under my breath, talking to the water, begging it not to explode, which, in retrospect, probably looked completely insane to anyone watching. Meanwhile, I noticed my dog had wandered in, curious about the noise and the sudden puddle forming on the floor. He stared at me like, "Really? This is your idea of helping?" Every movement I made seemed to be watched, judged, and silently mocked by the canine audience. My wife popped her head in at one point, raising an eyebrow and saying, "Are you sure you need help?" I nodded, soaked, flustered, and fully aware that my attempt at being helpful had turned into a slapstick performance worthy of a comedy special. That moment, I realized the simplest part of cooking, the boiling of water, was a metaphor for life. You can think you're in control. Reality steps in to remind you that good intentions don't always translate to smooth execution. Every splash, spill, frantic maneuver added to the story, creating a moment that was frustrating, embarrassing, and hilariously relatable all at once. Boiling water had somehow become the most dramatic event of the evening. I thought chopping vegetables would be a calm, controlled part of cooking, but apparently I was wrong. I grabbed a carrot and a knife, thinking this will be easy. 2 seconds in, the carrot slipped from my hand, bounced on the counter, and rolled across the floor like it had a mind of its own. I lunged to catch it, missing entirely, and ended up knocking over the cutting board. In the process, I stared at it for a moment, realizing that my plan to prepare dinner had instantly turned into a full-blown obstacle course. Then came the onions. Should have known better. I picked one up and started chopping, and immediately my eyes started to sting. I blinked, rubbed them, and somehow ended up flinging a piece across the kitchen. The dog jumped back, clearly concerned for his life. My wife poked her head in, asking if everything was okay. I nodded, tears in my eyes from the onion, trying to look confident while silently thinking, I am never doing this again. I began talking to the vegetables, explaining that it wasn't personal, that I was just trying to help. Of course, none of them listened, and they continued to slip, roll, and occasionally bounce off the counter. I tried to salvage the situation by being extra careful, lining up the carrots and onions neatly on the board. But then I grabbed the wrong knife, one that was too big for the small vegetables, and immediately felt the potential for disaster. Every chop became a test of coordination, timing, and patience, and I quickly realized I was failing spectacularly. By the time I finished the prep, the kitchen looked like a battlefield. My hands were sticky. I was already dreading the cooking part. Hit me that chopping vegetables is not just about slicing food. It's about managing chaos, keeping your balance, maintaining a fragile sense of confidence. Each vegetable had its own agenda. Every move I made felt like a high-stakes performance, full of comedy, tension, and just enough danger to keep it exciting. I thought following a recipe would be simple, like reading instructions and doing exactly what they said, but somehow it became a full-blown panic exercise. I grabbed a pan, turned on the stove, and tried to follow each step carefully. This is fine, I can handle this. Within seconds, the oil started popping aggressively, sending tiny droplets across the counter. I jumped back, waving my hand like I was trying to ward off an attack, muttered under my breath, it's fine, just adding flavor." My wife walked by, glanced at the smoke rising from the pan, and asked, "Are you sure about that?" I nodded with false confidence, fully aware that the kitchen was slowly turning into a comedy set. Stirring the ingredients felt like performing a high-wire act. I had one hand on the spoon, the other on the pan, trying to balance everything while avoiding the popping oil. Every time I leaned in, a small splash would hit my arm. I realized cooking was far less about technique and far more about endurance, reflexes, and keeping your dignity intact. I was narrating my own actions out loud, explaining to the pan that it wasn't personal. Somehow that made me feel slightly better, even if the kitchen disagreed. Then came timing, which is apparently crucial in recipes, but completely elusive to me. I was supposed to flip something at the exact right moment. My timing was off, and a piece of food slid across the pan like it had a mind of its own. I lunged to catch it, missing completely, and my foot almost stepped on a stray vegetable on the floor. The dog watched from a safe distance, clearly entertained and silently judging every misstep. It hit me that cooking is less about following a recipe and more about improvising in real time while keeping your confidence and humor intact. Each splash and misstep added to the story, creating a perfect storm of chaos, comedy, and surprisingly satisfying effort. Even when nothing went according to plan, the kitchen became a stage for the unexpected, full of laughter, tension, memorable moments. You ever notice how family and pets have a way of silently judging you when things go wrong? That's exactly what happened when I was trying to cook dinner. After the water boiled over and the vegetables started flying, my dog wandered into the kitchen and plopped down in the corner, eyes fixed on me, like I had just lost my mind. Bark or growl, he just stared, giving me that perfect canine, "Really? This is your idea of helping?" Look, spill every pop of oil, every flailing motion seemed to entertain him immensely. I started talking to him, explaining my plan, trying to justify my chaos, and he just blinked slowly, clearly unimpressed. Then my wife walked in. She didn't say much at first, just leaned against the counter, arms crossed, observing my antics. She asked, "Are you sure you need help?" And I nodded confidently, though deep down I knew I had no control over anything in that kitchen anymore. Every chop, stir, attempt to flip food in the pan was being silently critiqued, and it made me hyper aware of how ridiculous I looked. I was holding a spatula in one hand, a pan in the other, and trying not to spill oil everywhere, all while maintaining a confident expression, which was probably the hardest part. Even the dog added comedic timing. Whenever a carrot slipped or a piece of food bounced off the counter, he jumped back slightly, as if the kitchen were a stage and he was the audience witnessing my spectacular failure. I started exaggerating my movements, everything like a sports commentator, partly to calm myself and partly to entertain my caning critic. It turned every minor accident into a moment of absurd comedy. By the time I had finished most of the cooking, I realized the judgment from my family and my dog was part of what made the experience so memorable. Their presence, quiet observation, and subtle reactions amplified every mishap, making it simultaneously stressful and hilarious. It wasn't just cooking, it was live entertainment, and I was both the performer and the punchline. By the time I was done with the cooking chaos, I realized that trying to make dinner was less about the food and more about surviving the process with whatever dignity I had left. Every step, from boiling water to chopping vegetables, from flipping items in the pan to dodging popping oil, had become a test of patience, coordination, and sense of humor. I was drenched in sweat. My clothes smelled like a combination of burnt oil and onions. Yet there was a strange sense of accomplishment in having made it this far. Cooking, I discovered, isn't just about feeding someone, it's about committing fully to a chaotic adventure and somehow coming out alive. Smart, I looked around the kitchen and saw the evidence of my good intentions gone wrong. A few splattered ingredients on the floor, a slightly burnt pan, and a very judgmental dog who clearly didn't think I had earned the title of chef. My wife, however, took it all in stride. She gave me a look that said, "Well, at least you tried." And I realized that effort mattered more than perfection. It's funny how attempting to help someone you love can turn into a comedy routine, full of mishaps that somehow bond you more than any perfectly cooked meal ever could. Even amidst the chaos, there were small victories. I managed to get most of the food onto plates without major disaster. Seeing my wife take that first bite, even if it came with a raised eyebrow, felt oddly triumphant. The smoke alarm never went off. The dog didn't actually run away in terror, and somehow we both survived the evening. It struck me that the real lesson in all of this wasn't about cooking at all. It was about embracing the unpredictability of life, laughing at yourself, and finding joy in the attempt rather than the outcome. Sometimes helping, trying, failing spectacularly is exactly what makes a story worth telling. The kitchen may have been a disaster zone, became the stage for a perfect mix of comedy, humility, and shared laughter that I won't soon forget. So yeah, tried to cook dinner for my wife, and it went about as well as you'd expect. I spilled water, flung vegetables, nearly set off the smoke alarm, and somehow managed to make the dog judge me silently from the corner of the kitchen. The food may not have looked like the recipe promised, and it probably didn't taste like a 5-star meal either, but we survived, and somehow we laughed through it all. That's really the point, isn't it? Adulting and helping someone you love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, making an effort, being able to laugh at yourself when everything goes completely wrong. And honestly, if you can laugh while the kitchen is chaos, you're probably winning at life.